Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, thank you for joining me. Today, I want to draw your attention to a story that has not received the coverage it deserves, but one that is quietly reshaping global power. We live in an era where headlines are dominated by scandals, tweets, and courtroom battles, yet beneath the noise, tectonic shifts in global geopolitics are taking place. And right now, one of the most consequential stories is this: while Donald Trump finds himself under mounting pressure at home, China is steadily expanding its influence across Latin America. This is not an isolated development. It is a strategic transformation that could redefine the Western Hemisphere for decades to come. Trump's domestic struggles are not simply a matter of legal hearings, campaign missteps, or courtroom dramas. They are a reflection of a deeper erosion of American leadership at a critical global moment, all while the former president is consumed by indictments, investigations, and partisan warfare. The world is shifting in ways that transcend the headlines. Geopolitics does not pause for personal crisis. Instead, rival powers are moving forward, filling voids left by America's distraction. The central irony here is striking, just as Trump proclaims his vision of America first. The very conditions of his political survival are causing America to fall behind in shaping global realities. This paradox is more than a domestic drama, it is a geopolitical vulnerability. Consider how much oxygen is consumed by Trump's legal and political battles. Endless news cycles fixate on prosecutors, judges, rallies, and scandals, but what remains hidden in the shadows is the pace at which other nations, most notably China, are redrawing the economic and strategic map. In politics, perception is power, and right now, the perception abroad is that America is weakened, distracted, and increasingly unreliable. Allies hesitate. Rivals exploit. Trump's domestic turbulence then is not confined to Washington courtrooms. It echoes in presidential palaces from Brasilia to Beijing. That is the true cost of distraction, the steady erosion of credibility. There is another layer of irony worth noting. Trump has always cast himself as the strong man, the deal maker who could stand up to China, Russia, or anyone else. Yet, while he projects this image, his domestic vulnerabilities weaken America's leverage abroad. Leaders of other nations see a man under siege, a political system mired in division, and a country unable to focus on long-term strategy. They understand a timeless truth: a power is not only about military strength or economic weight, it is also about stability, predictability, and coherence. When a leader is consumed by personal survival, the nation's global vision collapses into the background. This is not simply theoretical. The timing could not be more consequential. Latin America, once assumed to be firmly within Washington's orbit, is opening its doors to China. Beijing does not need to outspend Washington militarily in the region. It simply needs to be present with offers of investment, all trade, and infrastructure while America is preoccupied. That presence, coupled with the absence of American focus, shifts the balance of trust and influence. And here lies the central hook. The future of U.S. Power abroad may well be decided not by treaties or wars, but by the domestic implosion of its leadership. Trump's political troubles also project weakness into economic policy. Investors and governments around the world recognize instability when they see it. If the U.S. cannot ensure continuity in leadership or policy, if each administration is consumed by undoing the last E, then foreign partners hedge their bets. They turn elsewhere. In this case, elsewhere means China, a country offering long-term consistency, at least by comparison. The courtroom battles in America may seem like domestic theater, but the consequence is global hesitation about America's role as a partner. One must remember that geopolitics is opportunistic. Power abhors a vacuum, and where one leader falters, another rises. Trump's America, fixated on internal drama, has provided precisely such a vacuum. China, with its quiet but steady expansion, has seized the opening. Russia, too, plays its part, though in more destabilizing ways. The point is that global rivals are not waiting for America to sort itself out. They are moving forward while Washington is paralyzed. Trump's domestic troubles, therefore, are not only his personal challenge, they have become a strategic liability for the United States itself. And so, when observers wonder why China's influence is advancing in Latin America, or why global confidence in America's leadership seems diminished, they must connect the dots. The courtroom dramas, the indictments, the bitter partisanship, these are not separate from foreign policy. They are the very conditions that define it. A distracted, weakened president translates into a distracted, weakened country. Trump's personal battle for political survival is, in effect, America's geopolitical battle for relevance. And the sobering reality is that while he fights for himself, the world moves on without waiting. China's rise in Latin America is one of the most underappreciated shifts in modern geopolitics, and, and yet it carries implications that reach far beyond the region. For decades, the United States assumed that Latin America would remain securely within its orbit, a place where Washington's influence was unquestioned and uncontested. That assumption no longer holds true. Today, China has emerged as the top trading partner for several of the region's largest economies, including Brazil, Chile, and Peru, and its footprint is expanding year by year. This development is not accidental, nor is it temporary. It is the outcome of a deliberate strategic effort by Beijing to extend its influence through commerce, infrastructure, and diplomacy. The hook, of course, is that while America is distracted by internal divisions and short-term politics, China is patiently laying the foundations for long-term dominance. Look at the numbers, and the story becomes impossible to ignore. In the early 2000s, trade between China and Latin America was barely noticeable. Today, it exceeds 450 billion annually. What began with commodities, soybeans, copper, and oil has grown into a diversified economic relationship that includes high-speed rail projects, renewable energy ventures, digital infrastructure, and even space cooperation. These are not one-off deals. They are structural shifts. A port built in Peru, a railway financed in Argentina, or a 5G network rolled out in Brazil. These are lasting imprints that bind economies together for decades. When China builds, it does so with the long view in mind. That is its strength. That is why its rise in Latin America cannot be dismissed as fleeting. What makes this moment especially significant is the contrast in approaches. Washington often arrives in Latin America with conditions, sanctions, or demands. Beijing arrives with loans, construction crews, and a promise of partnership. For governments facing budgetary crises, crumbling infrastructure, or political unrest, the appeal is obvious. A Chinese-backed project can provide jobs, growth, and a sense of momentum, even if it carries risks of debt dependency down the line. Leaders calculate in the short term, and in that calculus, China's offers look far more attractive than America's lectures. The shift is not ideological so much as it is pragmatic. Latin American countries are not declaring loyalty to Beijing, but they are opening doors that once seemed closed. This raises an urgent question. Is Washington even aware of how much ground it has lost? The U.S. Foreign policy establishment has often treated Latin America as an afterthought, a region to be engaged only during crisis. But China has treated it as an opportunity. That difference in mindset is now yielding results. For Beijing, Latin America provides not just resources and markets, but also diplomatic support in global institutions. Each trade deal, each loan, each infrastructure project helps China secure votes in the United Nations, allies in international disputes, and legitimacy in reshaping global governance. This is soft power at its most strategic, and it is happening right in America's neighborhood. The irony is that Washington still speaks of Latin America as if it holds uncontested sway when the facts on the ground tell a different story. When Chinese companies control major shipping ports, when Huawei technology underpins national telecom networks, when state-owned banks finance critical energy projects, the reality is that Beijing's influence is already embedded. This influence is not easily reversible. Once a port is built, it cannot be unbuilt. Once a trade dependency is established, it does not vanish overnight. The United States may wake up to this reality, but by then, the structures will already be in place. That is the quiet genius of China's approach. It works slowly, steadily, and leaves footprints that endure. There is a deeper hook here as well. What we are witnessing is not just China expanding its influence, it is Latin America rewriting its own place in the global order. For centuries, the region has been defined largely by its relationship with the United States. Now, with China's rise, Latin America is exercising agency, playing powers against each other, and seeking new avenues of development. This is not merely about dependency, it is about choice. And that choice carries consequences for the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. As we connect the dots, all the story becomes clear. China's rise in Latin America is not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a global pattern. From Africa to Southeast Asia to Europe, Beijing is deploying the same playbook: trade, infrastructure, and investment as tools of influence. What makes the Latin American case so profound is that it unfolds in what was once America's uncontested domain. While Washington looks inward, China looks south. While Trump battles political and legal storms, Beijing builds railways, ports, and alliances. That quiet expansion is the story of our time, and it will shape the future of the hemisphere in ways that few in Washington seem prepared to confront. For more than a century, the United States regarded Latin America as its unquestioned sphere of influence, a region where no outside power could seriously compete. The Monroe Doctrine, announced 2 centuries ago, was not just a diplomatic statement. It became the foundation of U.S. Foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. Yet today, that dominance is slipping and the shift is undeniable. China has quietly but decisively positioned itself as a rival power in the region, and Washington now finds itself facing the uncomfortable reality of isolation in what it once called its own backyard. The hook is striking the very nations that once relied almost exclusively on U.S. markets and U.S. influence are increasingly turning toward Beijing for trade, capital, and strategic partnerships. This is a transformation with profound implications, and it is happening while America remains distracted by domestic discord and political upheaval. Latin America's pivot toward China is not sudden. It has been building for 2 decades. But the speed of change in recent years is breathtaking. Brazil, the largest economy in the region, now trades more with China than with the United States. China's copper exports flow mainly to Chinese markets. Peru's mining sector is sustained by Chinese demand. Argentina and Ecuador have turned to Chinese loans when access to U.S.E. dominated financial institutions became difficult. These choices are not ideological. They are pragmatic responses to economic realities. When Washington offers austerity, Beijing offers liquidity. When the U.S. imposes sanctions or conditions, China arrives with fewer strings attached. The result is a gradual but unmistakable realignment of loyalties. What makes this moment especially revealing is the contrast in perception. Washington still speaks as though it possesses uncontested sway over the region, yet leaders in Latin America no longer see the U.S. as the indispensable partner it once was. Instead, they view it as one option among several. Beijing, with its steady presence, is rewriting the equation. It offers long-term trade agreements, infrastructure projects, and diplomatic respect that Latin American leaders have long sought. And for nations that have grown weary of Washington's heavy-handed approach, China represents not just an alternative source of investment, but also a symbolic escape from dependency on the United States. The symbolism matters as much as the economics. When Chinese firms build ports in the Caribbean or finance railroads in Argentina, it signals that the global balance of power is no longer confined to distant theaters like the South China Sea or the Middle East. it has arrived in the Western Hemisphere, a region the U.S. once considered untouchable. The hook here is dramatic. America is no longer the only power shaping its immediate neighborhood. For the first time in modern history, another great power is embedding itself in the political and economic fabric of Latin America. Trump's presidency sharpened this isolation. His administration often engaged with Latin America through threats of tariffs, talk of walls, and the imposition of sanctions. While those gestures resonated with his domestic base, they alienated governments across the region. China, by contrast, offered loans, infrastructure, and markets, tangible benefits that leaders could showcase at home. In the choice between confrontation and cooperation, many governments chose the latter. The irony is that while Trump's slogan promised America first, his approach often left America alone, sidelined in a region it once dominated. This shift is not only about economics, it is also about diplomacy and global governance. Latin American countries, when faced with choices in international institutions, now often align with China's positions, or at least avoid automatic alignment with Washington. Each port, each railway, each loan creates a bond that translates into diplomatic weight. The United States, once able to count on a block of loyal votes in international forums, can no longer assume that support. That erosion of automatic alignment is perhaps the clearest sign that America's isolation is real and growing. The deeper truth is that Latin America is not simply being lost to China, it is asserting its own agency. For decades, the region was treated as a subordinate player in global politics, with Washington calling the shots. Now, with China's rise, Latin America has options. Those options give it bargaining power it never previously enjoyed. By engaging Beijing, these nations are telling Washington, we are no longer dependent on you, and we will not be confined to your terms alone. This newfound leverage is changing the dynamics of the hemisphere in ways that will outlast any one administration. What we are witnessing then is not just the erosion of US dominance, but the emergence of a multipolar Western Hemisphere. The very concept of America's backyard is being dismantled in real time. And while Washington debates internal politics and Trump fights for his political survival, the strategic reality is that the United States is increasingly isolated in the region it once controlled. That isolation, quiet but unmistakable, is one of the most consequential developments of our time. China's expanding presence in Latin America is often described in economic terms, but to view it solely through the lens of trade is to miss the larger and more unsettling reality. This is about far more than soybeans, copper, or oil exports. What is unfolding is a strategic expansion of power, one that operates through ports, telecommunications networks, energy grids, and infrastructure projects that carry profound geopolitical consequences. It is a form of influence that does not require warships or military bases, but that can, over time, reshape the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. The hook is simple yet stark. what looks like commerce today could serve as leverage tomorrow. And in international politics, leverage is often the difference between dominance and dependency. Ports offer one of the clearest illustrations. A port financed and built by Chinese firms in a Caribbean nation or on the Pacific coast of South America is not just a hub for container ships. It can serve as a logistical node for global supply chains, a foothold for Chinese companies, and potentially down the road, a site with strategic uses that go beyond trade. The United States, once assumed such facilities, would always fall within its sphere of influence, but that assumption is increasingly out of date. With every port project Beijing undertakes, it secures not only economic returns, but also a strategic presence in waters once dominated by U.S. naval power. Telecommunications provide another powerful example. As countries in Latin America roll out 5G networks, many of them rely on Chinese companies such as Huawei and ZTE. These networks are not just about faster cell phones. They are the digital nervous systems of entire economies carrying sensitive data, enabling financial transactions, and underpinning national security systems. The presence of Chinese technology in such critical infrastructure means that Beijing holds a degree of access and influence that Washington cannot easily counter. A nation whose communications backbone is tied to Chinese providers is a nation less likely to align unquestioningly with U.S. demands. Energy infrastructure tells a similar story. Across the region, Chinese banks and firms are financing dams, power plants, and renewable energy projects. These ventures create dependencies that last for decades. An energy grid linked to Chinese investment means that political leaders must consider the interests of Beijing when making decisions. Energy, after all, is not just a technical matter, it is the lifeblood of development and national security. When a foreign power controls or significantly influences that lifeline, it gains more than an economic role. It gains a stake in the political future of that country. What makes this expansion so effective is its subtlety. Unlike military bases or formal alliances, ports, grids, and networks are often presented as purely economic or developmental projects. They generate jobs, foster growth, all, and are welcomed by local governments desperate for investment. But beneath the surface, they create long-term leverage. A port cannot be dismantled easily. A telecommunications network cannot be swapped overnight. An energy grid financed by foreign capital cannot be severed without immense disruption. These projects tie nations to China in ways that are durable, often irreversible, and profoundly strategic. The United States, by contrast, has often underestimated the significance of this quiet expansion. Washington tends to view security through the prism of military deployments and alliances, while Beijing views it through the lens of economic integration. In the 21st century, it is often the latter that proves more enduring. A port or a telecom network may wield more influence over a nation's choices than a military alliance signed in distant capitals. And that is precisely why China's strategy in Latin America is so potent. It redefines power not through confrontation, but through connectivity. The broader consequence is that U.S. influence in the region becomes constrained. Leaders in Latin America, aware of their growing dependencies on China, will hesitate before aligning too closely with Washington on issues that could antagonize Beijing. That hesitation is the essence of strategic leverage, means that when global crises arise, whether related to Taiwan, climate negotiations, or trade disputes, the United States can no longer assume Latin American support. Each country will weigh its choices through the prism of its Chinese ties, and often those ties will prove decisive. This is the true depth of China's expansion in Latin America. It is not a matter of replacing the United States overnight or planting flags in capitals. It is about embedding influence through infrastructure that is indispensable to modern life. The hook here is unsettling the ships docking at Chinese finance ports, the data flowing through Chinese built networks, the electricity generated by Chinese backed projects. These are the quiet instruments of power, and they are steadily transforming Latin America into a region where China's presence is not only welcomed, but structurally entrenched. Trump's political rise was built on a promise that he alone could confront America's rivals, especially China, uh, with strength and determination. He declared that America first would mean no more being taken advantage of in trade, no more one-sided deals, no more loss of U.S. dominance. Yet the reality of his presidency revealed a different picture. While he launched tariffs, trade wars, and a barrage of confrontational rhetoric, China pursued its strategy with patience, discipline, and vision. The hook is undeniable. While Trump fought to win headlines, China fought to win the future. And in much of Latin America, Beijing's long game outmaneuvered Washington's short-term theatrics. The tariff wars that Trump touted as victories created turbulence without achieving the intended goals. American farmers suffered when China responded with countermeasures, redirecting its agricultural purchases to Brazil and Argentina. Those very same countries deepened their ties with Beijing, grateful for the demand that offset U.S. losses. What began as a trade spat between Washington and Beijing had the unintended effect of strengthening China's economic partnerships across Latin America. The tariffs may have made for bold political theater at home, but abroad they accelerated the very shifts Trump claimed he would prevent. Meanwhile, sanctions became another blunt instrument in Trump's foreign policy, whether directed at Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua. They reinforced the perception that Washington offered punishment where Beijing offered partnership. For countries already struggling with debt and instability, China's willingness to provide loans and infrastructure, albeit often on tough terms, appeared far more constructive than U.S. sanctions that deepened economic pain. Leaders did not need to be ideologically aligned with Beijing to see the benefits of its approach. In the calculus of survival, Chinese capital was preferable to American restrictions. Here lies the paradox. America's coercive measures designed to assert dominance often drove countries further into China's embrace. The contrast between styles could not have been sharper. Trump's strategy was transactional, focused on short-term wins he could present as victories to his domestic audience. China's strategy was relational, focused on long-term commitments that would reshape the foundations of entire economies. Trump sought to project strength with threats. Beijing built strength with investments. Trump focused on headlines. Beijing focused on outcomes. This divergence explains why, despite Trump's confrontational posture, China steadily advanced its influence across the hemisphere. Consider how infrastructure projects became instruments of diplomacy. When China financed a hydroelectric dam in Ecuador or a railway in Argentina, it wasn't just building physical assets, it was weaving itself into the daily lives of those societies. Ports, power plants, and telecom networks become symbols of progress that local leaders can showcase to their people. Washington's offers, by comparison, often came with political conditions that generated resentment. The hook is evident. People remember who builds, not who criticizes. Even Trump's political rhetoric undermined U.S. standing in Latin America. His focus on building a border wall, his disparaging remarks about migrants, and his threats of cutting aid painted an image of a United States hostile to its southern neighbors. China, by contrast, positioned itself as a respectful partner, emphasizing mutual benefit and shared growth. While Trump sought to deter Latin America through fear of exclusion, China attracted it with the promise of inclusion. The symbolic difference was as significant as the material one, shaping perceptions of who was truly invested in the region's future. What emerges is a sobering irony. Trump's America First often meant America alone. By focusing narrowly on punishing adversaries and protecting domestic political gains, his policies left space for China to offer alternatives that were more appealing to governments across Latin America. The tariffs did not weaken Beijing, they redirected its economic partnerships. The sanctions did not isolate U.S. adversaries, they pushed them toward new patrons. The wall did not secure America's influence. It weakened trust among neighbors. Each move Trump made for short-term political advantage opened long-term opportunities for China. China's long game thrives precisely because it is not tied to electoral cycles or personal scandals. It is methodical, consistent, and adaptive. Trump's approach, on the other hand, was reactive, driven by news cycles and political survival. In the contest between short-term theatrics and long-term planning, it is increasingly clear which approach yields lasting results. The real question is whether the United States can recognize this before the shifts become irreversible. For now, the evidence in Latin America suggests that China's patience is paying off while Trump's combative tactics have left America sidelined in a region it once dominated. The choices being made in Latin America today are not simply about trade agreements or infrastructure projects. They are about the very architecture of the global order in the 21st century. For much of modern history, the Western Hemisphere was viewed through the prism of U.S. dominance, a region where Washington dictated the terms and where alliances were assumed rather than negotiated. That assumption is now unraveling. China's steady expansion into Latin America is not merely a regional development. It is a tectonic shift that will shape the balance of power far beyond the Americas. The hook here is powerful when 660 million people and some of the world's most resource-rich nations begin reorienting their alliances. The ripple effects reach every corner of the globe. Latin America's choices will help determine the future of global trade. China has already become a dominant consumer of the region's raw materials: copper from Chile, soybeans from Brazil, oil from Venezuela, and lithium from Bolivia and Argentina. But Beijing's ambitions go further. It seeks to integrate Latin America into its Belt and Road Initiative, connecting the region's ports, railways, and digital networks to global supply chains that orbit around China rather than the United States. If Latin America deepens its reliance on Beijing's markets and infrastructure, the traditional dominance of the US dollar and US trade flows could gradually erode. That is not an overnight transformation, but history is shaped by such slow, steady realignments. Security arrangements, too, are quietly being reshaped. For now, China has avoided overt military entanglement in Latin America, but its growing control over ports, digital networks, and critical infrastructure provides it with leverage that is, in many ways, more influential than military bases. A country whose energy grid is financed by Chinese loans or whose telecom system runs on Chinese technology will think twice before aligning with Washington in moments of great power conflict. Security in the 21st century is not only about weapons, it is about who controls the systems that keep a nation running. By embedding itself into those systems, Beijing is cultivating influence that can shape decisions in times of crisis. Diplomacy is another arena where these choices matter. For decades, the United States could count on a reliable bloc of Latin American allies in international forums, whether at the United Nations or within global trade organizations. That reliability is no longer guaranteed. Nations that are tied to China economically will be more cautious about supporting U.S. Positions that run counter to Beijing's interests. Already on issues ranging from climate negotiations to recognition of Taiwan, Latin American countries are increasingly aligning with or accommodating China. The hook is clear. Influence in Latin America is no longer automatic for Washington. It must now be competed for, and the competition is fierce. The larger context is that we are entering a multipolar world, one where no single power dictates the rules. Latin America's orientation will help determine how this multipolarity plays out. If the region leans toward China, it strengthens Beijing's claim to be not just a regional actor, but a global leader. if it balances between the US and China, it forces Washington to rethink its approach and perhaps adopt more respectful cooperative strategies. Either way, the days of uncontested US dominance are fading, and the choices made by Latin America's leaders are hastening that process. What makes this shift especially important is that Latin America is not a peripheral player. It is home to vast reserves of critical minerals essential for the clean energy transition, including lithium and rare earth elements. It possesses fertile agricultural land that feeds millions worldwide. It holds enormous biodiversity that is central to global climate stability. Whoever partners most effectively with Latin America will not only gain access to resources, but also secure a strategic advantage in shaping the future of energy, uh, food security, and environmental sustainability. This is why China's rise in the region matters, not just to Washington, but to the entire world. The deeper hook is that global order is rarely rewritten by dramatic battles alone. It is often rewritten by quiet, cumulative choices. Each trade agreement signed with Beijing, each port built by Chinese firms, each loan extended by Chinese banks represents a small but significant shift. Alone, they may seem modest. Together, they amount to a reorientation of global power. Trump's domestic crisis may dominate headlines, but the long-term story is that while America is consumed with internal conflict, China is patiently securing the loyalties and dependencies of an entire continent. That is how the future of global order is shaped, not in bursts of noise, but in the steady, quiet accumulation of influence.